Hey, kiddos. Good day today. Today I was thinking before we read chapter 8, maybe I'd tell you a short Grandpa Gordy story, since you're always asking to tell Grandpa Gordy stories. So here we go. Grandpa Gordy, as you know, was one of the most colorful people you've ever met, and everyone's favorite. Ice fishing. When you go fishing in the winter on a frozen lake in Minnesota in an ice house, there's really not a lot to do. And so Grandpa would make up a lot of really silly games to play in the ice house. I mean, you've heard some of them. One of the most famous stories that Grandpa Gordy would do in the ice house is we would always have a contest to see who could keep their foot in the ice hole the longest. And no matter how long anybody tried, Grandpa Gordy always won every single time. And he would just laugh so hard every time as we were just in pain, saying, "Oh, it's so cold, it hurts!" And he would just laugh at his big old smile. And once we all pulled our feet out, he would pull his foot out too. We played a lot of silly games, but kiddos, one of my favorite ones was, for whatever reason, one time as we were really bored in the ice house, Dad, your grandpa, dared Uncle Nathan and I to eat a live minnow. And he said he would give us $5 if we would do it. And both Nathan and I looked at each other, and we were probably, I was probably 12 and he was probably 9. So $5 is a lot of money. It was a fortune. And so we said, okay. So we had a can of Dr. Pepper to wash it down with, and we both just each took a minnow at the same time and swallowed it whole, and quickly drank a lot of Dr. Pepper. And man, Grandpa laughed so hard. He thought it was so funny because for the next 20, 30, 45 minutes, we kept making these comments about, oh, it feels so weird, because we would burp up Dr. Pepper taste, but then it would be full of this weird fishy minnow taste too. And so Grandpa laughed really hard whenever somebody else would do something silly, because he did a lot of silly things too. All right, kiddos. I will do another Grandpa Gordy story on Thursday night too. There's a lot of good ones, especially ice fishing ones, like when things fell into the lake, Anyway, chapter 8 tonight from Gregor. Last night we read chapter 7, and if you remember from chapter 7, basically Gregor is down in this underland world in the city of Regalia with he and his little sister Boots, and he is trying to escape tonight. Trying to escape the underland because he thinks he wants to go back home. And so he sneaks out in the middle of the night with Boots, and they go find this waterway, this big, super fast river, and they end up at the end of the chapter on a beach with 2 huge rats. And so we will pick up there, chapter 8. "Ah, here at last," the rat said idly. "By your reek, we expected you ages ago. Look, Fanger, he has brought the pup." A long nose poked over the first rat's shoulder. It had a friend. "What a tidbit she is," said Fanger in a smooth, rich voice. "I will allow you, the entire boy, if I may have the sweetness of the pup to myself, Shed." "It is tempting, but he has more bone than meat, and she is such a morsel," said Shed. "I find myself quite torn by your offer. Stand, you boy, and let us better tell your stuffing." The cockroaches had been freaky, the bats intimidating, but these rats were purely terrifying. Sitting back on their haunches, they were a good 6 feet tall, and their legs, arms, whatever you called them, bulged with muscle under their gray fur. But the worst part of all was their teeth, 6-inch incisors that protruded out of their whiskered mouths. No, the worst part was that they were clearly planning to eat Gregor and Boots. Some people thought rats didn't eat people, but Gregor knew better. Even the regular-sized rats back home would attack a person if they were helpless. Rats preyed on babies, old people, the weak, the defenseless. There were stories. The homeless man in the alley, a little boy who'd lost 2 fingers. They were too horrible to think about. Gregor slowly got to his feet, retrieving the torch, but keeping it down at his side. He pressed Boots back against the cavern wall. Finger's nose quivered. This one had fish for supper, mushrooms, grain, and just a bit of leaf. Now that's flavorful, you must admit, Shed. But the pup has gorged on stewed cow and cream, returned Shed. Not to mention she is clearly milk-fed herself. Now Gregor knew what all the fuss was about, or what all the fuss about bathing had been. If the rats could detect the handful of greens he'd eaten hours earlier, they must have an unbelievable sense of smell. The Underlanders hadn't been rude when they'd wanted him to bathe. They had been trying to keep him alive. He went from attempting to evade them to wishing desperately that they'd find him. He had to hold the rats off. It would give him time. The expression startled him. Vicus had said killing him would give the roaches no time. By time, did the Underlanders simply mean more life? He brushed off his clothes and tried to adopt the rats' casual banter. Do I have any say in this? He asked. To his surprise, Fanger and Shed laughed. He speaks, said Shed. What a treat. Usually we get nothing but shrieks and whimpers. Tell us, Overlander, what makes you so brave? Oh, I'm not brave, said Gregor. Bet you can smell that. The rats laughed again. True, your sweat carries much fear, but still you have managed to address us. Well, I thought you might like to get to know your meal better, said Gregor. I like him, Shed, howled Fanger. I like him too, choked Shed. The humans are commonly most dreary. See, we may keep him, Fanger? Oh, Shed, how is that to be? It would entail much explaining, and besides, all this laughter gives me hunger, said Fanger. And me, said Shed. But you must agree, to eat such amusing prey is a great pity. A great pity, Shed, said Fanger. But without remedy, shall we? And with that, both rats bared their teeth and moved in on him. Gregor slashed at them with his torch, sending a trail of sparks through the air. He held it in front of him with both hands like a sword, fully illuminating his face. The rats pulled up short. At first he thought they were afraid of the flame, but it was something more. They looked stunned. Mark you, Shed. His shade, said Fanger in a hushed voice. I mark it, Fanger, said Shed quietly. And he is but a boy. Think you he is? He is not if we kill him, Fanger growled, and lunged for Gregor's throat. The first bat came in so silently that neither Gregor nor the preoccupied rat saw it. It caught Fanger mid-leap, knocking him off course. Fanger plowed into Shed, and the rats landed in a heap. Instantly, they regained their feet and turned on their assailants. Gregor saw Henry, Marith, and Perdita zigzagging their bats above the rats' heads. Besides avoiding one another in limited space, they had to dodge the wicked claws of the rats. Fanger and Shed could easily leap 10 feet into the air, and the sparkling ceiling of the cavern over the beach was not much higher. The humans began to dive at the rats, wielding swords. Fanger and Shed fought back viciously with claws and teeth. Blood began to stain the beach, and Gregor couldn't tell whose it was. Flee! Henry shouted at Gregor as he whipped past them. Flee, Overlander! Part of him wanted to badly, but he couldn't. First of all, he had no idea where to go. His boat was high on the beach, and the tunnel, well, he'd rather take his chances in the open than in the tunnel if he had to deal with more rats. More important, he knew the Underlanders were only here because of him. He couldn't just run away and leave them to face the rats by themselves. But what could he do? At that moment, Shed caught the wing of Marth's bat in his teeth and hung on. The bat struggled to free itself, but Shed held fast. Perdita came in behind Shed, taking off his ear with one stroke of her sword. Shed gave a howl of pain, releasing Marth's bat. But as Perdita pulled out of her dive, Fanger leaped onto her bat, ripping a chunk of fur off its throat and hurling her to the ground. Perdita hit her head on the cavern wall as she landed and was knocked out. Fanger loomed over her and aimed his teeth at her neck. Gregor didn't remember thinking of his next move. It just happened. One minute he was pressed against the wall, and the next he had jumped forward and thrust his torch into Fanger's face. The rat shrieked and stumbled backward, right into Henry's sword. Fanger's lifeless body fell to the ground, taking the sword with it. Fanger's shriek finally woke Boots, who took one look over Gregor's shoulder and began wailing at the top of her lungs. Her cries echoed off the walls, sending Shed into a frenzy and disorienting the bats. "Out fly you, Marth!" yelled Henry. "We can hold!" cried Marth, although his bat was spraying blood from its wounded wing. Things didn't look good. Marth's bat was losing control. Henry was unarmed. Perdita was unconscious. Her bat was gasping for air on the ground. Boots was screeching, and Shed was insane with pain and fear. Though bleeding badly, he had lost none of his speed or strength. Marth was trying desperately to keep the rat from Perdita, but he was just one guy. Henry flew interference, but he couldn't get in too close without a sword. Gregor crouched over Perdita, holding the torch. It seemed a fragile defense against the crazed Shed, but he had to do something. Then Shed leaped, catching Marth's bat by the feet. The bat slammed into the wall, and so did Marth. The rat turned on Gregor. "Now you die!" screamed Shed. Boots screamed back in terror. As Shed lunged at them, Gregor braced himself. But Shed never made it. Instead, the rat let out a gasp and pawed at the blade jutted through its throat. Gregor caught a glimpse of Lux's bat, Aurora, flipping upright. He had no idea when she'd arrived. Luxa must have been flying completely upside down when she'd stabbed Shed. Even though Luxa had flattened herself on the bat's back, Aurora barely managed to pull out of the maneuver without scraping her off on the ceiling. Shed slumped back against the cavern wall. There was no fight left in him. His eyes burned into Gregor's. "Overlander," he gurgled, "we hunt you to the last rat." And with that, he died. Gregor had only a moment to catch his breath before Henry landed beside him. Pushing Gregor out onto the beach, he lifted Perdita in his arms and took off yelling, "Scorch the land!" Blood pouring down his face from a gash on his forehead, Marth was already wrenching the swords from Shed and Fanger. He dragged the rats into the river, and it quickly carried their bodies away. His bat shakily regained the use of its wings, and he hurled it onto its back. Marth caught Boots' backpack and hoisted Gregor onto his stomach in front of him. Gregor saw Aurora hook her clawed feet into the fur at the shoulders of Perdita's injured bat. Luxa had at some point retrieved the oil from the boat. As they rose into the air, she smashed it into the ground. "Drop the torch," yelled Marth, and Gregor managed to straighten his fingers, releasing it. The last thing he saw as they darted out of the cavern was the beach bursting into flame. That's chapter 8, kiddos. So Thursday night, about 8 o'clock, I'll do maybe a little longer Grandpa Gordy story, and then we'll read chapter 9. Love you. Have a good night.